To discuss, let's bring in Middle East analyst Micah Halpern. Micah, how concerned should we all be given the ratchet up of the rhetoric over the military tensions in the Persian Gulf and also Iran following through on its threats? That's it. They're going back to enriching uranium.
We should always be concerned about what happens with Iran and how Iran acts and reacts. But recognize also that there are a lot of players in the game. It's not just Iran and the United States, or not just Iran and the Europeans. Remember, the Chinese are really involved in this. Remember, the Russians are really involved, and they really have Iran's back. So there's a bigger game than simply the monodimensional things that most of us look at, the United States and Iran itself. But Iran knows full well that the United States does not want to engage. They really know that. So Iran is going to push, and they're going to continue to push until they get some resistance back. And right now, that's sort of the discussion that's happening in the White House itself. What resistance should they play?
Are we at that point of resistance now because they are following through with the threat to step up uranium enrichment? Is this the point that brings us closer than we have been to a potential conflict now?
No, but what Iran wants is not a conflict. They want a loosening of the restrictions.
But they're not going to achieve that by stepping up uranium enrichment.
It's not so clear that that's not going to happen. So we're going to see in terms of the pressure that's being brought on the United States by other forces, not by Iran itself. That's what's important. That's when I talk about the multiple dimensionality here. So what happens is Iran is doing this because they're feeling a lot of pressure. Unemployment of people under 35 is unbelievable. People graduating from college almost have nowhere to go. Their exports have dropped tremendously. There are a lot of issues that they're concerned about, including issues like water. There's a terrible drought that they're confronting, and there's nothing they could do about that except maybe desalinate, which is what Israel would like them to do, and Israel actually put it online to help them do that.
So, Micah, 1 week ago, President Hassan Rouhani, he gave European powers this ultimatum. Either you help us avoid U.S. sanctions, or we're going back to enriching uranium. Now we see Iran escalating, going from threats to actions. And what are we seeing from Europe? Not much.
Nothing. Actually, that's the problem with Europe in general. So Europe in general has difficulty making moves, especially that are potentially problematic in terms of the necessary gumption required to stand up.
But they're very critical of when the United States
does. Of course, because they're really good critics. We know a lot of people like that in life also, not just diplomats. People who are great critics but really don't do anything at all. And that's the case with Europe. Europe really doesn't have the power, though. They could try to influence the United States in a lot of different ways. One of them is if the United States actually cared. I will tell you, the interesting thing in terms of power base in Europe, it's no longer the French, it's no longer the British, it's no longer the Germans. The best powerhouse in Europe right now is Poland. And actually, Poland is seeing eye to eye with the United States, and their economic situation has improved tremendously, not just because of that, but because of what's going on. So Poland is someone to look for.
When you flat out now have Saudi Arabia accusing Iran of ordering the strike on that pipeline, how much of an impact and how much more pressure does this put on Iran? Because, listen, you have other Arab nations, you have other nations around the world that see Saudi Arabia is now even saying Iran is responsible for escalating part of this.
This is actually a bigger concept that's been going on for decades, or actually hundreds of years, centuries. The tension between what is considered the Sunni versus the Shiite leadership in the world. And so the Shiites are Iranian, and the Sunni leadership is obviously the Saudis. And they're at one another's throats all the time. We just happen to see it now. For 100 years, we never saw it because, well, we didn't really care. Now we care because it ultimately bleeds into our world. So we actually are paying attention to this. This is actually creating a good relationship between the United States, Israel, and the Saudis and all of their minions.
You mentioned Israel. In case of an open military confrontation between the United States and Iran, could Israel become a target?
Of course. Israel would be a direct target, not a collateral target, but a direct target by Iran's secondary sources, not them themselves. And it's important. That would be Hezbollah especially.
All right. Micah Halpern, thank you for this, but stick around because we have a lot more to break down with you.
And here with us again is Middle East analyst Micah Halpern. Thank you so much for sticking around to talk about this aspect. Let's talk about what we just heard from Gadi Eisenkot here, who said coordinating with the Palestinian Authority is in Israel's best interest. The key is that you have other factions who want a seat at the table or want to derail the whole process. Hamas, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. So can there be any actual negotiation and any progress if you have all three organizations fighting for power?
Of course, because ultimately what Gadi is speaking about is not political coordination. What Gadi's speaking about is military coordination, security coordination. They're completely different issues. On the political side, there is no discussion. There's no interaction. On the military side and the policing side, there's a tremendous amount. And that's what he's really emphasizing. Because with that, not only is the Palestinian Authority secured, because Israel is helping secure them, but also securing them from Hamas, also, by the way, you should note, in Islamic Jihad, but also Israel is much more secure because of it. So the interaction between the military and police sides are very, very important, and that's what he's referring to. There is no diplomatic interaction.
That is one of the things that the deal of the century is, that's a place where it's coming. It's supposed to encourage a political dialogue between all sides. But given the Palestinians' efforts to try and thwart the deal before they even saw the details of the deal, and, their ongoing boycott of the Trump administration since the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, should we really assume that Israel is going to be the only side that will dedicate a serious thought to the deal of the century?
If I were advising either of the leaders on both sides, I would say yes, and then let's work out the details. That's always the best and most positive way of dealing with things. It's a positive way, but there's also a way which says, I want a solution. When you say an automatic no, you're actually suggesting that there's no possibility for move, or it's all or nothing. All or nothing never works in negotiations, not in terms of business and not in terms of diplomacy. And the Palestinians want all or nothing, and that's not a way to solve this problem. Interestingly, Israel, there are a lot of questions that so far that's been leaked as to whether or not they're real leaks or authentic leaks or whatever it is. There are a lot of things that Israel's going to have difficulty swallowing. But
especially
nonetheless,
since we don't know what the government will look like.
Exactly, and which is something we should speak about, because that will determine part of what they consider digestible or not in terms of the agreement. But the point is that it's better to say yes and work out the details with all the parties involved than to just say no, I don't like it, before you've even seen it. It shows a lack of maturity, but it also shows a lack of desire to come to an agreement.
Jared Kushner has said that this will require tough compromises and concessions on both sides of the aisle here. But a question that's been asked so many times over the years, and especially lately on the heels of the latest flare-up between Gaza and Israel, is that should there be concerted talks to put everything to try and work out a peace plan at this point? Or does it send the wrong message that says, all right, you know what, we'll talk peace, we'll offer concessions, even though rockets are still being fired? Yeah,
I don't think that the rockets are part of the deal.
Yeah, no. Right, but does that show that you're rewarding acts of terror with talks of peace?
Well, I think that part of any solution with regard to Gaza would have to be a total demilitarization, would have to be an absolute recognition that they can't shoot rockets, and if they do, a response is going to be there, that there actually is and will be an elective process there where Egypt will take a major role. Not Saudi Arabia, by the way, but Egypt will take a major role. At least that's what Israel would like. The United States would like Saudi Arabia to step in. The point, though, is that if they're just going to sign a deal and the Palestinians are going to continue to send rockets from Gaza, then that's not really a deal at all. That's the continued status quo, and that's Israel's not interested in pursuing. So there has to be some sense of teeth that are included in the deal itself. What do you do when things fall apart? What do you do when a group of 30 or 40 or 100 people actually control the lives and the directions of 1.5 million that are living in Gaza?
Eric here mentioned Jared Kushner, one of the architects of the deal of the century, and I think it was about 2 weeks ago when he was interviewed in Washington, and he was asked there on the stage, what would you consider as the success of the deal of the century? And he really dodged the question. He said it was a Washington question, but I want to transfer this question to you. Sure. Even if both sides were to reject, let's say, the deal of the century as it stands right here on the paper, is there still a significance to this paper? Could it be a starting point for, future negotiations? Could it change the discourse?
Yeah, that's what all original documents are. All documents are the beginning. That's what I'm saying. In other words, you have to say yes and you come to move from there. They're all a bridge or a springboard into something bigger. Because you can't possibly, one group of people sitting in the room drawing a draft cannot possibly understand the roles of everyone involved. Besides, there has to be some give and take. And so the United States is clearly biased in certain ways, right? We know that, the Palestinians know that, the Israelis know that. That doesn't mean that they're incapable of creating a fair proposal. And that's a big difference. It's important to recognize the distinction. Yes, they're biased. Yes, they're pro-Israel. Yes, the Palestinians and the Israelis know that. But they're interested in creating a fair proposal right now, which is going to be painful on all sides. But in order to get to the solution, you have to sit down and talk about the proposal.
We should talk about Prime Minister Netanyahu very quickly, because he, of course, had dealt with some criticism on how he handled the latest flare-up with Gaza, but he's also dealing with some issues right now in forming his coalition.
Correct.
Talk about that a little bit.
Well, firstly, there's no way anyone could have done differently with Gaza, given that it was on the rise of an election, the eve of an election, and everything else. People can say critique, but they wouldn't do anything differently. That said, right now, in Israeli politics, in elections, the person who wins doesn't necessarily have the most strength. The person who is in number 2 and 3 positions have much more strength because they need to be involved and they need to receive from the person who won. So Netanyahu wins the election, but now he has to give up on a lot of serious stuff in order to bring these people into the coalition itself. And that means, and we don't know because it's all behind really uncharacteristically quiet about what they're negotiating about. We can just guess. The reality is that the difference in this coalition will mean, and the different characters will mean a tremendous amount in terms of the peace proposal.
Sure. Micah Halpern, thank you so much for breaking it down.
Always a pleasure.